G'day. It's Sunday, the 29th of January 2023, and gonna go through some laserdiscs I've already looked at, but I'm gonna talk about some stuff that I didn't mention before.
Something about the sleeve of this American Graffiti laser just kind of annoys me in that it's sort of the way it's designed. It's sort of blocking um, most of the artwork for the film. So that sort of what you can see there is from the movie's original poster, which was drawn by the great Mort Drucker, who is probably best known as he was an illustrator for Mad Magazine for like 50 or 60 years. He died only a few years ago, and for my money, Mort Drucker is the greatest caricaturist of all time. I think he was just brilliant. He was a genius. But sort of most of his artwork for American Graffiti there is kind of blocked. I mean, we can sort of see there's Ron Howard and Cindy Williams, there's Paula Matt, Mackenzie Phillips, there's Charles Martin Smith, but Candy Clark is sort of being blocked, and we don't see Richard Dreyfuss at all. Yeah, so it's a bit of a shame. Interestingly, Mort Drucker's artwork, he did artwork that's in the film's original trailer as well, which you can see if you check out the film's the American Graffiti, the original theatrical trailer. I think Altered States would actually make a pretty good double bill with Brainstorm, the 1983 Douglas Trumbull film, because both films are they're similar in some respects. They have it's all about cutting edge research by scientists, sort of like very sort of dangerous experimental stuff, with involving a lot of like hallucinations and sort of like brain alteration and stuff. I think Altered States is a much better film than Brainstorm. Brainstorm has a lot of problems with it in my opinion, but I mean it's worth watching, but it's not a particularly great film. But I do think Altered States is a pretty great film. Ken Russell left behind one of the most diverse and bonkers filmographies ever by a major filmmaker. I think The Devils is Russell's undisputed masterpiece. In I think Altered States is pretty good. It's up there for me. I am a fan of Ken Russell. I mean, I do like Women in Love as well, and I like Tommy, the adaptation of the Who, rock musical, and I do like Crimes of Passion, which is a very strange sort of bizarre like erotic thriller from 1984 with Kathleen Turner and Anthony Perkins. That's a good movie. He did make a lot of crap, I have to say, but he's one of those guys that I think he made enough good movies that you don't really mind that he made a lot of crap as well. Lenny was actually a very distinct change of pace for Bob Fosse, although thematically it's of a kind with all of Fosse's other films. This was the first film Fosse made that wasn't a musical, didn't have any musical numbers or anything. So I think a lot of people were kind of dismissive at the prospect of it at the time. They sort of thought Fosse was kind of stepping out of his lane. So he did Sweet Charity, which was a musical based on a Broadway production, and then he did Cabaret, which again was a musical. Then he did Lenny. Then after this, he did All That Jazz, which is a musical, and Star 80, which is not. So Lenny and Star 80 are both the two non-musical theatrical films that Bob Fosse made, and they're both kind of sort of sordid, depressing sort of biopics about sort of like doomed tragic celebrities. Looks can be deceiving. I was led to believe that I had the laserdisc for Bob Fosse's Lenny, which turned out to not be the case. I'll show you why. Yeah, so if we can see here, the disc inside is actually Kate Bush live at Hammersmith Odeon. Yeah, so I mean, am I disappointed? Well, yes, but I mean, I'm a huge fan of Kate Bush. I actually don't mind having this on Laserdisc. The only problem is I would like to have the Kate Bush sleeve to go with the Kate Bush disc if I can't have the Lenny disc to go with the Lenny sleeve. Brian De Palma is one of my favorite filmmakers. I think he's made lots of really, really good films. If I had to name my favorite 5 De Palma films, chronologically, not preferentially, I would go with Phantom of the Paradise from 1974, Carrie from 1976, Blowout from 1981, Scarface from 1983, and Carlito's Way from 1993. But I mean, it's it's very tough picking just five. I mean, outside of that, I mean, you've also got like Sisters, Dressed to Kill, The Untouchables, Casualties of War, Femme Fatale. They're all pretty good movies. I mean, he's just one of those guys that's just got to like there's a few turkeys in there, but most great directors have made even the great filmmakers have got a few bad movies here and there. But De Palma's filmography overall stands up really really well, I think, and Blowout might be at the top of all the films he's made. The Dead Zone was released at a time when the whole Stephen King adaptation thing was really going into high gear. So I mean, there was Carrie in 1976, Salem's Lot in 1979, The Shining in 1980. I can't remember if anything came out in 81, but 82 there was Creepshow, and then in 1983 alone there was Christine, Cujo, and The Dead Zone, and then I think 84 was Firestarter and Children of the Corn, and Silver Bullet. I think Silver Bullet was 85. But anyway, we can sort of see that the Dead Zone was sort of coming right in the midst when that suddenly we were getting like multiple Stephen King adaptations in one calendar year. So at the time, the Dead Zone was quite different to the films that Cronenberg had made before this. So most of Cronenberg's films, excluding Fast Company, the 1979 racing car drama that he made, which is kind of doesn't really involve science fiction or horror or anything at all. But most of Cronenberg's other films, they do involve people that possess like extraordinary abilities, but they're kind of grotesque abilities, and they're sort of blunted, and they're like scientifically derived abilities. Like we see this in like Rabid, and we see it in The Brood, and we see it in Scanners, and we see it in Videodrome. There's not really, I mean, in the Dead Zone, there's no like scientific explanation for the extraordinary condition that Johnny Smith has. It's like it's basically supernatural. It's Stephen King. It's it's just a supernatural phenomena. But David Cronenberg, he sort of pointed out that it's not really it's not a complete divergence from his previous work. I mean, Cronenberg said that like maybe in the Dead Zone, God is the scientist and Johnny Smith is one of the failed experiments. I believe Stephen King actually suggested Bill Murray for the role of Johnny Smith in the Dead Zone, which actually isn't a crazy notion, because if you know that and then you read the book, the way Johnny Smith is in the novel, he is actually kind of Bill Murray like. He's sort of described as being a sort of a tall, kind of odd looking guy who sort of his demeanor is sort of like an agreeable daze. And he's sort of got more of a sense of humor in the book than he has in the film. So he actually is kind of Bill Murray like in the book. In fact, he kind of has his relationship with his girlfriend Sarah Bracknell in the book. Like he's sort of always constantly ribbing her and sort of making jokes at her, and sort of jokingly telling her that she does too much cocaine, which she doesn't. But it's kind of, if you watch Saturday Night Live when Bill Murray was on it, like he has that kind of when he was on Weekend Update, sort of as a celebrity, like news guy, and like he had that very kind of, or you knuckleheads kind of, constantly, joshing and sort of ribbing the audience. It's kind of that's kind of like what Johnny Smith is sort of like in the book of the Dead Zone. There are some very good stylistic touches in the Dead Zone, like Johnny's hallucinations or his premonitions or whatever. There was the choice to sort of put Johnny like inside those visions, to sort of have him experience them like within the realm of the premonition, and it's done really well. It sort of makes the visions a lot less abstract and a lot more accessible and a lot more, I think, emotionally affecting. Christopher Walken is really good in this film. There are so many great scenes. The whole investigation of the Castle Rock killer, which leads to a pretty gripping and pretty violent climax, and then there's all the stuff with Greg Stilson, the evil politician played by Martin Sheen, and it's sort of in retrospect, it's sort of interesting watching the Dead Zone if you're a fan of The West Wing, sort of seeing a future. There's a vision of Greg Stilson as president of the United States, where he's just like a complete off his rocker, like insane, like megalomaniac presiding over possibly the destruction of the earth. It's a very different presidential performance than Martin Sheen gave in The West Wing. There's a scene in The Dead Zone, the film version, which perfectly encapsulates what I think is the way that the movie managed to um, sort of adapt the novel in such a way that it streamlined it, but it didn't lose the essential spirit of the book. And it's to do with Johnny Smith's his coma. Like in the book, Johnny's in the car. He's in the car accident. He's in a coma, and like we're sort of, as the reader, we're kept aware of the passage of time. So Johnny is in his coma for, I think, 4.5, 5 years, and the novel sort of describes everything that's happening in his absence. So it sort of we're kind of kept away from, like, Johnny sort of kept at a distance from us, and when he awakens, we feel sympathy for him, because when it's going to be told, when he's going to find out that he's missed 5 years of his life, we feel sorry for him because we know what he doesn't know. So it builds sympathy for him. And also, but in the movie, it's different. In the movie, what happens is Johnny's in the accident, then it sort of cuts away, and then it cuts to Johnny awakening, and then he's told that he's been in a coma for 5 years. So the audience is put in the same position that Johnny's in. Like, we don't know that all this time has passed. We learn that information at the same time that Johnny does. So we feel sympathy for him because we're kind of sharing. We're in his position. We're sharing. The information comes to us the same time as it comes to him. So it's very interesting because the approach of the book and the approach of the novel, they both make us feel great sympathy for Johnny, but the two media sort of do it in very different ways. Another moment in the film that's adapted very well from the novel is the moment when what happens is Johnny finds out, using his abilities, he finds out that his doctor, Dr. Sam Weizak, who's played in the film very well by Herbert Lom, Sam Weizak sort of thinks that his mother was killed during World War II, and Johnny learns that Sam's mother is actually alive and well and living in America, where Sam is not the same state, but he basically tells Sam that he can find his mother. And what happens is in Sam sort of phones up his mother, and then he sort of can't bring himself to actually speak to her. And in the book and in the film, Johnny asks why. And in the book, Sam, he has this very sort of beautiful, sort of bittersweet kind of speech to Johnny, where he basically says that he can't disrupt his mother's life. She's sort of in her twilight years. And she had a life, and he can't. He feels that it would be too emotionally destabilizing, to sort of suddenly come back into her life at this point. It's a very moving moment. In the film, Sam doesn't really have that monologue. When Johnny asks him, why he didn't, speak with his mother, Sam just says, because it was not meant to be. And that sort of, it imparts pretty much the same, it has the same effect, but it does it in a much simpler way. And that's the key, I think, to why The Dead Zone is such a good movie. It makes decisions to impart the exact same emotional impact that the book has, but it does it in a way that's more commensurate to the medium. It does it in a way that doesn't sort of stop for like huge tracks of dialogue. It just gets through it, and then it's a great screenplay. The Towering Inferno was directed by John Gillerman, who was a very prolific filmmaker. He directed the 1976 film version of King Kong, which I have to be honest is my favorite of all the King Kong movies. In addition to the headlining stars Steve McQueen, Paul Newman, William Holden, Faye Dunaway, like a lot of disaster movies of that era, it's got an all-star cast of like sort of a selection of Hollywood square type celebrities, most of whom end up getting killed in this movie. There's who's in this? Robert Vaughn, Robert Wagner, O.J. Simpson is in this. He plays a security guard, I think, if I remember correctly. Fred Astaire is in this. Jennifer Jones is in it. Somehow George Kennedy, Ernest Borgnine, and Shelley Winters aren't in The Towering Inferno. I have no idea how this movie managed to avoid having any of those people in it. The film actually had a unique production in certain respects. It was the film was actually a co-production between two major studios, and it was based on two separate novels. The film was a co-production between Warner Brothers and 20th Century Fox. What happened was Irwin Allen was going to produce the movie for Warner Brothers. It was going to be based on the novel The Tower by Richard Martin Stern, and meanwhile, 20th Century Fox was making their own like skyscraper on fire movie, which was going to be based on The Glass Inferno by Thomas M. Scortia and Frank M. Robinson. And what happened was, I think Irwin Allen sort of realized that the two projects could sort of harm each other because they were so similar. And so what they did was the two studios decided to combine their efforts and sort of make one movie that was based on both novels. So The Tower and The Glass Inferno became The Towering Inferno. The film was, I believe, both studios put up half the money each. The budget was split. Was divided evenly between Warner Brothers and 20th Century Fox. The movie was actually filmed on the 20th Century Fox lot, and Fox had the US and Canadian distribution rights, but Warner Brothers had the international distribution rights and also the television rights. So this LaserDisc here is a Warner home video release. This is obviously Japanese. I imagine that the LaserDisc release in America was probably through 20th Century Fox or CBS Fox or something like that. As you can see, I do own copies of both novels that the film is based on, although I haven't read either of them, so I don't know how good they are or how much, which one is the one that the movie is sort of based more overwhelmingly on. As I mentioned before, the film was shot on the 20th Century Fox lot, and I believe Mel Brooks was shooting Young Frankenstein on the Fox lot at the same time that the Towering Inferno was being filmed. I seem to remember reading somewhere or hearing somewhere an anecdote of all the cast and the extras from the movie sort of all being covered in soot. And at the commissary or something, or on the studio and like on the set, and Mel Brooks would like sort of walk in there and just yell "boring" at them. There's a very interesting postscript to the Towering Inferno. So the novelist Roderick Thorpe, he wrote the 1966 novel The Detective, which was made into a film in 1968, The Detective, starring Frank Sinatra. So Roderick Thorpe went to see the Towering Inferno in 1975, I think, and the premise of a skyscraper on fire, that sort of gave him an idea of writing a story about a skyscraper, but in his idea it wasn't a fire, it was going to be a man being chased by terrorists. And he wrote so Roderick Thorpe, he wrote that as the 1979 novel Nothing Lasts Forever, which was a sequel to The Detective. And that novel, Nothing Lasts Forever, the film rights were acquired by 20th Century Fox, and many years later it was made into a film, Die Hard. So in a very strange way, we can perhaps credit the Towering Inferno for leading to Die Hard. Patton begins, of course, with that very famous prologue sequence, which is General George S. Patton, his address to the Third Army in 1944, prior to the Allied invasion of Normandy. So it's a really fantastic moment. It's very memorable, very iconic with George C. Scott, standing on stage in front of an absolutely gigantic American flag and delivering his motivational speech to the troops. Very, very famous moment. I mean, I imagine that the Academy probably would have handed George C. Scott the Oscar just for that one scene alone. I do wonder if any aspiring actors use that monologue sequence for for acting classes or for auditions or anything, because if they don't, they really should. There was a book written about the infamous production of Heaven's Gate. It was by Stephen Bach, and it was called Final Cut: Dreams and Disaster in the Making of Heaven's Gate. I do actually own a copy of the book. I have a hardback copy. I've never actually read it. My understanding is that it does chronicle the insane circumstances and situations around the filming of Heaven's Gate. Just like Michael Cimino just like basically constructing a small town and then blowing it up. And I think, I don't know if it's in the book, but there's all sorts of speculation or rumors or whatever about Cimino blowing up horses during the climactic battle sequence. I still can't get around that. The battle sequence at the end, it's really quite something to behold. You've got all these mercenaries like just slaughtering immigrants, and then you've got like John Hurt like sort of staggering, like a drunken John Hurt staggering around the battlefield as the slaughter is happening, and he's just sort of like commenting, like ironically on what's going on around him. It's a very strange sequence, but it is a very strange movie. Postscript to JFK, I did go to Dallas, Texas, and I did go to Dealey Plaza in 2009. So yeah, it was kind of the fulfillment of a sort of a weird ambition to actually go to the site of the assassination. Yeah, it's sort of interesting, the passage of time, because when JFK was released in 1991, I mean, it was less than 3 decades after the assassination, and it felt very different, then compared to now. I mean, like, Jackie Kennedy was still alive, Ted Kennedy was still alive. It was very much, it still felt kind of like recent history, and I mean, now where it's this year it'll be 60 years since the assassination, and I feel that it's kind of, it's much less of I think 9/11 sort of replaced or superseded the Kennedy assassination as like the big, where were you when this happened thing. We're sort of moving further and further away from it, and obviously it's becoming, there's fewer people for whom the assassination is like a living memory. So it's kind of, this movie is sort of like the events it portrays, or ostensibly portrays, it already feels like it's receding even further and further into history. William Peterson starred in To Live and Die in LA in 1985, and then Manhunter in 1986. So, like, back to back in consecutive years, William Peterson starred in two of the best movies of the decade, I feel. I think I read somewhere that the role of Will Graham was kind of it was quite affecting for William Peterson. He had a long time. It took him a while to like shake the character off. Like, when he looked in the mirror, he saw, he felt he was still that character, and I think he had to do something drastic. He had to like dye his hair a different color or something, just so when he looked in the mirror, he didn't see Will Graham anymore. I have read Red Dragon, the original Thomas Harris novel that Manhunter is based on. Yeah, the film, it's generally faithful to the book. It doesn't really change anything. It sort of deletes some material. There's a lot of stuff in the book. The backstory of Francis Dolarhyde, it sort of goes into his past. That's all sort of not in the movie, and also the ending is kind of abbreviated in the film. The book has a much more. It actually has much more of, I feel, a schlocky ending, like the kind of ending you would expect to be in the movie, where they think the killer's dead and everything seems like it's resolved, and then he comes back and it's, it pops up, and it's the film is much more restrained, and I think better for it, for not really having all that extra stuff at the end. But that's just my opinion. Silence of the Lambs was based, of course, on the novel by Thomas Harris. It was scripted by Ted Talley, and it's interesting that when a decade after Silence of the Lambs, when they made the film adaptation of the next Hannibal Lecter book, Hannibal, they had difficulty sort of getting personnel involved with the Silence of the Lambs back for Hannibal. I think it was out of a sense of loyalty to Silence of the Lambs, or like kind of, I guess, the perception of how schlocky Hannibal was. That, so Jonathan Demme didn't come back to direct. Ted Talley didn't come back to write. Jodie Foster didn't come back to play Clarice Starling. Scott Glenn didn't come back. So it felt like, Hannibal was kind of, I think that film, in a sense, it was kind of doomed from the start, just because of the all the shake-up in personnel that they had to do in the space of like 10 years, which isn't really even that long. The Blues Brothers was the second of 3 movies that Dan Aykroyd and John Belushi would star in. So Belushi and Aykroyd had both been founding cast members of Saturday Night Live on television. So they were both in Steven Spielberg's 1941, the World War II comedy from 1979. Although they're apart from each other throughout almost all of the movie, they only really share a scene towards the end. So then they co-starred in the Blues Brothers together, of course, characters that the pair of them had originated on Saturday Night Live. And then in 1981, they made a third movie together, Neighbours, which was a sort of a suburban black comedy directed by John G. Avildsen, which didn't do very well at the time. It's still kind of, I don't think there are many people that sort of proclaim it to be any sort of comedic masterpiece, but I'm actually a fan of it. I think it's a pretty interesting film. John Landis told a really eye-opening anecdote about the Blues Brothers, the distribution of the Blues Brothers. So this is back in the day when movie exhibitors had a lot of power. Like they could decide, the exhibitors would sort of watch the movie and then decide whether or not they were going to actually distribute it in their theater chains. And what happened was Landis was called into the office of, I think it was Lou Wasserman, who was the head of Universal Pictures at the time, and Ted Mann was there, who was a mogul, who was the head of Mann cinemas. Like, so he owned a whole chain of cinemas. And so the Blues Brothers had it obviously had guest appearances and musical numbers by a lot of really great black artists. Obviously there was Cab Calloway, James Brown, Ray Charles, Aretha Franklin, John Lee Hooker, and so there was a perception that this was kind of a black movie, or a movie that would appeal predominantly to black audiences. These artists, their commercial stock wasn't actually particularly good at the time. Like the Blues Brothers kind of reinvigorated their careers. But anyway, so Landis was in the office with Lou Wasserman and Ted Mann, and Ted Mann said, he would book the Blues Brothers in a theater in Compton, but he wouldn't distribute it. He wouldn't distribute it in any of the national theaters or in Westwood, which was I think it was predominantly white upper class neighborhood in Southern California. And when John Landis wanted to know why he wouldn't book the Blues Brothers for Westwood, apparently, according to Landis, Ted Mann said, because I don't want black people in Westwood. It's just like, Jesus Christ, that's just amazing. Kind of sad, but it's just, yeah. So that's kind of what the Blues Brothers was up against, really. It was, as a movie, it was kind of a celebration of the great, rhythm and blues musical acts, of the time. The movie is quite upfront. Like, I mean, I don't really like the sort of perception that the Blues Brothers is kind of appropriating, black music, because if you watch the movie, like, it's not as if any of these black artists are like backup bands for the Blues Brothers. Like, they all get like their own, really great. They're all like centered in their own musical numbers. They're great. Like, the movie absolutely treats them with, with the respect that they deserve. And I think it's such a great showcase for for that music and for those personalities, the people that created that music. I do have a sentimental attachment to Alien 3 in one respect, not so much to the movie itself, but for one of the items of merchandise associated with it, which is the Alien 3 game for the Sega Mega Drive, which is what the Sega Genesis was called in some territories outside of America. So the old 16-bit game console. I have the Alien 3 game. I had it. I still have it, and it's really good. It bears pretty much no resemblance to the plot of Alien 3. It just involves, you play as Ripley, and you're sort of running around with various weapons like a flamethrower or a pulse rifle or a missile launcher, and you just have to blow up lots of aliens and sort of rescue these, people. But it's funny because, I mean, the movie Alien 3, I mean, the plot, the crisis of the movie sort of hinges on the plot point that they don't actually have weapons to fight one alien. And in Alien 3, the game, you've got lots of aliens and you've got lots of weapons to shoot them with. So it's kind of, it's sort of more akin to the plot of Aliens than Alien 3. But, I guess, nobody looks to, video game developers for plot fidelity, at least not 30 years ago. My entry point into the whole Alien saga was kind of it sort of had to do with Alien 3, because what happened was, I mean, I was vaguely aware of Alien and Aliens, but it wasn't until 1992 when Alien 3 had its theatrical run. What happened was the theatrical run of Alien 3 coincided with the television premiere of Aliens Special Edition, and I watched that when it was on TV. So this was 1992, and that was the first time I'd seen Aliens. It was the first time I'd seen any of the Alien movies, and it kind of scared the crap out of me, but I loved it. And from then on, I was sort of all in on the Alien movies. Of course, I went back and discovered the first movie, and I sort of got into it through that. But I do remember when Alien Special Edition premiered on television, on network television in Australia, they had TV spots for Alien 3 during the ad breaks. So I sort of remember there was kind of a, in the schoolyard, there was a whole kind of, alien, like all of us kids, we were sort of all massively into this whole alien thing. It was kind of, because, I mean, I was in primary school at the time. So I was like, how old was I? I was like 10, I think, maybe 10, 10 sort of almost 11, and like it was just these movies were kind of a bit above what we were, the normal stuff we were seeing. It was kind of that thing when you're kids and you sort of have scary movies that are kind of a little bit beyond your age group, but you sort of want to see them because they're kind of because the allure of being sort of for a slightly older audience than you are. If you're a fan of the 1980s British comedy Withnell and I, there's a strange connection between that movie and Alien 3, because two of the main cast members from Withnell and I are in Alien 3. Ralph Webb, who played Danny in Withnell and I, plays Mr. Aaron in Alien 3, and Paul McGann, who plays Marwood in Withnell and I, plays Golic, one of the prisoners, although most of his role was cut down in the original theatrical version, but he gets a lot of his scenes reinstated in the assembly cut or the producer's cut or whatever. So Richard E. Grant isn't in the movie. I think David Fincher actually tried to get him for the role of Clemens, the doctor that Charles Dance played, but he couldn't get Richard E. Grant. So it would have been interesting if you would have had three of the guys from Withnell and I back in the same movie. I don't know if there was ever any any intention to get Richard Griffiths, Uncle Monty, but I don't know who he could have been. I suppose he could have had the Brian Glover role, but I don't know if that was ever realistically on the cards. William Friedkin told a story about the casting of William Peterson in To Live and Die in LA. So they were looking to cast the central character of Richard Chance, and I can't remember who it was, if it was a producer or a casting director or someone. But anyway, someone told William Friedkin, there's this guy playing Stanley Kowalski on A Streetcar Named Desire, on stage, called William Peterson, and you have to see him. And Friedkin was skeptical. He was like, Brando is Stanley Kowalski. There's no other Stanley Kowalski. Forget about it. And the guy said to Friedkin, no, you have to come and see this guy. Like, the women women are just all over this guy, like they love him. And so Friedkin went, and that's he obviously was impressed by William Peterson, and he was cast in the movie. William Peterson, he was a stage actor. He had been in some films before. In fact, you can get a glimpse of him in Michael Mann's Heat from 1981. I believe he plays a bartender in a scene in that. The film is really well acted across the board. John Pankow, I really like him as Vukovic, who's Richard Chance's like reluctant partner, and it's interesting because the movie at the beginning, it sort of plays on the notion of you've got the loose cannon, doesn't play by anyone else's rules figure, partnered with the sort of the more uptight, straight-laced one, but the whole movie is kind of like the true character arc in the movie is actually John Pankow's character, where his character sort of becomes terrified by what's happening, what they're involved in, and then like it's kind of like his gradual transformation into which sort of pays off right at the end of the movie. So it's very interesting and kind of it's kind of unique from other sort of like cop action films because of that. Willem Dafoe is absolutely terrific in this as the villain. I think it's like he's referred to as Eric Masters sometimes, but Rick Masters at other times. I think it's generally referred to as Rick Masters. But anyway, he's really good in this. He's a very unique kind of villain where he's kind of, he's evil and murderous, but he's kind of like an artist with a sort of a sort of a strange death wish. There's a whole thing where he sort of makes portraits of himself and then he sets them on fire and sort of gazes at his own like visage burning, which kind of is symbolic of what happens later on in the film. And he's also kind of he's kind of like lithe and creepy, just a really great villain. I was too young to see Full Metal Jacket during its for its original theatrical run, so it's one of those movies like I pretty much all of Stanley Kubrick's films. I believe I discovered on video first. I did see it many years later on the big screen. I believe it was a double screening with Dr. Strangelove, another great Kubrick film. I really love the simplicity of this sleeve design. So that scene that we're sort of seeing on the back, the photograph, which is the death of the character Cowboy, played by Arliss Howard. It's sort of interesting seeing that image because there was a poster of the movie. There's a record store in Fremantle that it doesn't have it anymore, but it used to have a poster for Full Metal Jacket, an original poster from 1987 advertising the movie. I guess it was either for the film's theatrical run or maybe it was when it came out on video. But anyway, the poster was just a full poster of this photograph, this scene from the movie with the title Full Metal Jacket on it, and like I really love that poster. It wasn't for sale. I think it was just part of the decor of the store. It was, it was stuck up on the wall. But yeah, if that poster was ever up for sale, I would have grabbed it. And if I was an unscrupulous, larcenous bastard, if there was anything in that store I was going to steal, it probably would have been that poster. In the Line of Fire, it found Clint Eastwood at sort of like maybe the apex of his career as both director and star. Because I mean, in 1992, Clint directed and starred in Unforgiven, which was a huge hit, and critically, it won. A best picture, one best director for Clint Eastwood, and then following that, he starred in this movie, in the Line of Fire, which was a huge crowd pleaser. It was a huge commercial hit as well. So this is kind of 92, 93. They were just really, really good years for Clint Eastwood. John Belushi was a cast member of Saturday Night Live for 4 seasons, so 4 years, and this compilation is only 60 minutes long. So obviously, there's a lot of stuff that Belushi did that isn't on here. This is kind of like if there's a band that released a lot of really good albums, and then there's like a one disc greatest hits compilation. So it's kind of like it's a good entry point. A good sort of taster, but it doesn't really. It's not really a comprehensive summation of the whole output. I'm a really big John Belushi fan. I'm a big fan of the more famous movies that he starred in, like National Lampoon's Animal House, The Blues Brothers. 1941 was a bit of a misfire, but Belushi's sort of just a member of an ensemble in that. But I really do like two movies that Belushi starred in that are sort of underrated. The romantic comedy Continental Divide with Blair Brown, and the comedy Neighbours that he starred in with Dan Aykroyd. They're both really good films. After Belushi's death, Bob Woodward wrote the infamous biography Wired, which was released in 1984, I believe, and that was made into a film in 1989, also called Wired, which is a pretty bad movie, but it's sort of interesting as a curio. I believe Wired is on LaserDisc. I don't have a copy of it. I do have it on VHS. It's never been released on DVD or Blu-ray or anything like that. I mean, I think maybe the rights are sort of tied up somewhere. Sort of as a counter to Bob Woodward's very sensationalistic, very slanted book, Belushi's widow, Judith Jacqueline Belushi, she wrote a book, Samurai Widow, which was released in 1991, and it's a pretty good book. And then in 2005, Judith Jacqueline Belushi and Tanner Colby wrote a sort of an oral history book, Belushi, which is really good too. So yeah, a few good books to check out if you're a John Belushi fan. Body Double was released in 1984, so I was, that was sort of before my time as a film goer. I was only a few years old at the time, although I do have the film on VHS, DVD, and Blu-ray, as well as this Laserdisc, obviously. I'm kind of kicking myself. I missed the opportunity to see Body Double on the big screen a few months ago. There was a screening of it. I believe Holiday was the second of two 1938 romantic comedy starring Cary Grant and Katharine Hepburn. There was also Bringing Up Baby, which was directed by Howard Hawks. Bringing Up Baby was released, I believe, in February 1938, and then Holiday was released in June 1938. They're both really good films. Of the two of them, I think Bringing Up Baby is better. Bringing Up Baby is an absolutely fantastic movie. It's well worth checking out. It's one of the best of the 1930s screwball comedies. It was actually a very big influence on Peter Bogdanovich's What's Up, Doc from 1972, the film with Barbra Streisand and Ryan O'Neal, which was deliberately designed as a throwback to the classic screwball comedies, and it does owe a lot to Bringing Up Baby. In fact, I think the DVD of Bringing Up Baby has audio commentary by Peter Bogdanovich. Yeah, so I don't have Bringing Up Baby on Laserdisc, but I do have it on DVD. I'm not really big on Hugh Hefner's sort of self-serving cameo appearance in Beverly Hills Cop 2. Interestingly, there's a very brief appearance by a young Chris Rock, who sort of has a bit part in this movie. Some random moments in Beverly Hills Cop 2 I like. I really like the moment when Taggart falls into the swimming pool and he has to change his clothes, so he sort of comes bounding down the stairs wearing this sort of like golfing gear, sort of like a the checkered suit, sports jacket and everything, and Billy like sort of just breaks down and laughs. And I mean Taggart, he looks absolutely ridiculous. But the thing is, like Taggart, he just looks so pleased in those clothes. Like he's just so he just thinks he looks really cool in them, and it's like because he's so impressed, it's like kind of yeah, I'm impressed. I think he does look cool. I really like the Sidney Bernstein scene with Gilbert Gottfried. I mean, Gilbert Gottfried, he wasn't acquired taste, but if you're a fan of his style, then you'll really like his line deliveries. I really do think he's very funny in this. With lines like "Cuff me! There are people out there with chainsaws. You cuffing me?" I believe that an earlier phase of the development of RoboCop, Arnold Schwarzenegger was sort of touted as being the star, as starring as RoboCop, which I think they decided against it because they realized that for practical reasons they needed because the suit was so bulky, they kind of needed a more slender actor to be able to fit into it and to wear it, and it didn't really work with Schwarzenegger, and so that they cast Peter Weller, and I mean it was a good choice anyway, just because Peter Weller, he has that he's much more believable, I think, as a sort of a and he's more of an underdog type. You can sort of believe he's much more of a vulnerable screen presence, I think, as Alex Murphy, as well as obviously being a really good actor. I am a very big fan of Peter Weller. Another interesting feature of The Lion in Winter, it's got a terrific cast, is the performance of Nigel Terry as Prince John, who's kind of like sort of a slow-witted, sort of petulant, whiny type, sort of spoiled. But anyway, Nigel Terry, he never really went on to become, a particularly big star, but he did play King Arthur in John Borman's Excalibur, a very different kind of monarch, and if you sort of if you only really know Nigel Terry from Excalibur, his performance in The Lion in Winter is very, very different. I got to be honest, I'm not a huge fan of this particular sleeve for The Last Boy Scout. The reason being is, I mean, the film is pretty much it's a buddy movie. It's a two-hander. It's Bruce Willis and Damon Wayans, but as we can see, they've cropped the original poster quite significantly. We only see Bruce Willis. Like Damon Wayans isn't there at all. I mean, I don't know. I think maybe Damon Wayans didn't really mean anything to audiences in Japan or something. But I just think it's a bit. It's a bit, it misrepresents the movie, and I think it's kind of insulting to Damon Wayans. I'm a big fan of the films of Stanley Kubrick. Like I suspect a lot of people, I got into Kubrick through the films that he made that sort of have got much more, pop culture cachet. The Shining, A Clockwork Orange, Full Metal Jacket, 2001, Doctor Strangelove, and then I got into those films first, and then I sort of worked backwards and got into Kubrick's earlier films, like Paths of Glory and The Killing. Lolita, those sorts of films, and they're all good, obviously. The Greatest Story Ever Told had a very convoluted pre-production and production. I believe George Stevens originated the project with 20th Century Fox, and then there were all sorts of delays, and it eventually passed from Fox to United Artists. I think like millions of dollars were spent on the project before they'd even started shooting anything. So the film, I think David Lean had a hand in directing at least some sequences, because I think George Stevens took ill at one point. But so they filmed it. They filmed it mostly in Utah. So it has a very different look to like most other biblical films. A lot of them tended to have exteriors shot in like Europe, like Spain and stuff like that. Whereas The Greatest Story Ever Told was shot. The exteriors were shot in the US, so it has a very different look. When the film was released, there's like myriad versions, like running times of this movie. I believe George Stevens' original cut was 260 minutes, which was probably too long, and it premiered, I think, at 225 minutes, something like that. And then I think it was cut to 199 minutes for its general release, but there was also an even shorter version, I think 140 minutes. The version of the film that's officially released on VHS and DVD and Blu-ray, etc., is the 199-minute version. There have been fans of the film that have been clamoring for George Stevens' original cut, or at least the premiere cut, the 220 260 whatever minute version to be released. But it doesn't look like it's ever going to happen. It looks like the 199-minute version is as long a movie as we're ever going to see. I don't know if anyone even knows where the original print of the long version of the film is, or maybe it's not economically viable to restore it. For I don't know exactly how many people are clamoring for this movie, but it's a shame. I would like to see the super long version as opposed to the merely long version. The music score for the greatest story ever told is interesting. The So an original score was provided by Alfred Newman, the film composer, not the mascot for Mad Magazine. But George Stevens, he actually jettisoned a lot of the original music that Alfred Newman provided, and replaced it with pre-existing classical music, most prominently Handel's Alleluia chorus, which is used quite infamously during the resurrection sequence. I have heard the full Alfred Newman score. It has been released on the soundtrack, and I have to say I think it's a shame that George Stevens dropped a lot of the music. I think the film would have been better if Alfred Newman's original score, his complete original score, was retained. Yeah, so something that critics at the time sort of found annoying or hilarious, or hilariously annoying or annoyingly hilarious about this movie, is the incessant number of celebrity cameos. Like, there's a lot of like famous actors, actors and actresses that just sort of show up for like minimal screen time. So Pat Boone shows up as an angel. John Wayne, we've already discussed, as the centurion. Shelley Winters shows up as a lady who gets cured by Jesus, and Angela Lansbury shows up in this as the wife of Pontius Pilate, and like she has no dialogue. Like, you barely see her. I suspect she might have actually had dialogue in the original cut, of the movie. And sort of something that's interesting if you're a James Bond fan. There are three actors in this movie that went on to play Blofeld in various James Bond movies. So you've got Donald Pleasance, who played Blofeld in You Only Live Twice. He plays Satan in this. Telly Savalas, who played Blofeld in On Her Majesty's Secret Service, plays Pontius Pilate in this. And Max von Sydow, who played Blofeld in Never Say Never Again, is in this, obviously, as Jesus Christ. So, yeah, unfortunately, Charles Gray, Blofeld from Diamonds Are Forever, isn't in this movie. It would have been nice if they could have gotten a spot for him in this, but twas not to be. I recently acquired this item, which is the greatest story ever told, the original program from 1965. So I imagine this is what patrons of the film could have got in the cinema foyer back in 1965. So it's got some interesting pictures in it. See, it says presented in Cinerama. The film was screened in Cinerama, but it wasn't filmed in Cinerama. I think it was Panavision or something, and the film, it was projected with one projector, not three, so it wasn't true Cinerama. But anyway, we can see Max von Sydow. So this was, Max von Sydow, he'd been in some Swedish films, obviously the films he'd made with Ingmar Bergman, but I imagine this is the first time that the general international audience had sort of seen Max von Sydow. I think that prior to this, like in America, like the only people that would have been aware of him were whoever was watching Ingmar Bergman films. So he was kind of a new face, and I think that was why George Stevens cast him. He sort of wanted to cast like a generally unknown actor, so that people wouldn't have any preconceived notions of the person playing Jesus. So. Something that's disappointing about this booklet is that the photographs are great, but the text, there's a lot of text, as you can see, but it's not really anything to do. It's nothing about the actual production of the movie. It's all just like generic stuff about the life of Jesus Christ. So yeah, you're not really going to learn anything about the making of the film. There's the Last Supper. There's Sidney Poitier who does a cameo as Simon of Cyrene. There's John Wayne as a centurion. David McCallum as Judas Iscariot. You can't see his face there, but that's Martin Landau as Caiaphas. I think was it Virginia McKenna as Mary, the mother of Jesus, I think. So there's Van Heflin, there's Jose Ferrer, who plays Herod Antipas. I can't remember who plays Martha of Bethany. That's Claude Rains as Herod the Great. This was actually Claude Rains' last movie, and he's really good as King Herod in this. There's the Palm Sunday, the Temptation in the Desert, Charlton Heston as John the Baptist. Yeah, actually, you can see the crucifixion here. One of my peeves with this movie is the crucifixion. It's like very like fake and staged looking. It's like the set is just completely unconvincing. Like the mount, that it's on. It just looks really phony. Yeah, and everyone, it's all very like you can sort of see like they're all just like standing like in a very sort of artificial theatrical way. Like they're not really everyone's sort of standing around in their places. It just doesn't. It just like absolutely no spontaneity to the way George Stevens filmed it. There's the crucifixion. We can see the cast and crew are all listed there, and there's Jesus ascending into heaven, and there's I have to be honest. There are some pretty bad performances in this movie, but there are some good performances as well. Some of the performances I do like. Claude Rains I've mentioned as Herod the Great, Jose Ferrer as Herod Antipas, and Charlton Heston as John the Baptist. I think the sequences featuring the two of them are the best. There's some really good dramatic stuff between those two. David McCallum is really good as Judas Iscariot. Donald Pleasance as good. I think he's referred to in publicity as the Dark Hermit or something, but he's pretty much Satan. Telly Savalas is good as Pontius Pilate. He sort of plays Pilate as kind of like a sort of a military strongman type, which is an interesting interpretation. There's actually there are some sort of weird faces in this movie, like Jamie Farr, Klinger from MASH, is in this as one of the disciples, and there's some Roddy McDowall is one of the disciples. Robert Blake is one of the disciples. Russell Johnson, like the professor from Gilligan's Island, he's in this. David Hedison, who was the lead in The Fly, the original 1958 version of The Fly, he's in this. Mark Leonard, who's best known as Spock's father Sarek in Star Trek, the series, and also several of the movies. He's in this. He's one of the three wise men. It's just a bit of a grab bag of famous faces in this. Martin Landau as Caiaphas. He's pretty good. Now that I think about it, Sal Minio's good. There's probably now that I think about it, there's probably more good performances in this movie than I remember. I'm not entirely sure what to make of Max von Sydow's performance as Jesus Christ. I mean, Max von Sydow was one of my favorite actors. I mean, Father Merrin, come on. But his Jesus is kind of it's not a particularly magnetic performance. I think it's a bit inscrutable. I think there was an enigmatic. He's trying to bring a sort of enigmatic quality to the character of Jesus, but maybe it's just a little weird seeing a Scandinavian actor sort of made up to look like a first century Jewish man. The Greatest Story Ever Told, its budget was astronomical for its time. I think it was $20 million, which was a heck of a lot of money back then. The film, it didn't make back anywhere near that, during its original theatrical release. So the movie was, a sort of a spectacular bomb financially as well as critically. I think it was one of the reasons why, biblical epics sort of fell out of fashion in the 1960s. So this was 1965, and they sort of, as a genre, it kind of became old hat, and it wasn't really until the 1970s, like 1973, when there was kind of a different breed of biblical movie coming out. Stuff like Godspell and Jesus Christ Superstar, which were very, very different to the traditional biblical epics that Hollywood was making prior to that. Although, as subsequent events would demonstrate, The Greatest Story Ever Told was not the biggest financial disaster to be associated with United Artists. I mean, only 15 years later, United Artists did fund the filming of Michael Cimino's Heaven's Gate. Like a lot of fans of Blade Runner, I never fail to be moved by the so-called Tears in Rain monologue by Rutger Hauer's character Roy Batty. It's not really a monologue. It's actually very brief dialogue. But Rutger Hauer, he wrote his memoirs, All Those Moments. I think it was released in 2007. It's a really, really good book, and he sort of talks a bit about that speech, and how it was actually much longer, a bit more florid in its original version, and he sort of took it and sort of pruned it down and made it a lot more concise and a lot more evocative, and he added some lines, and yeah, it's a really good moment. One of the best, most iconic and unexpectedly emotional moments in science fiction film history. I'm a big fan of the original Blade Runner from 1982, and I'm also a big fan of the 2019 sequel, Blade Runner 2049, which is a lot better than most other belated legacy sequels to iconic films. I imagine Mary Tyler Moore's performance in Ordinary People was a great surprise to people who were only familiar with her television work, the Dick Van Dyke Show, the Mary Tyler Moore Show, because the performance, her performance in Ordinary People, where she plays this sort of cold, emotionally repressed disciplinarian type who sort of doesn't love her son. It's a very good performance for a very difficult character, and it didn't really lead anywhere in terms of further film roles of distinction for Mary Tyler Moore. She sort of went back to television, I think, for some sitcoms that didn't really do too well. One of the things I really don't like about Once Upon a Time in America is there's a rape scene that is sort of, in the context of the story, it's kind of treated in a very, they sort of don't really seem to attach much attention to it. It's sort of done in a very offhand way, I feel, and I think it's sort of, I don't really like it, and I think it actually did cause some controversy at the time. I think there were people protesting against that scene. I've seen King of Kings quite a few times, and something that always strikes me as amusing is there's some sort of sloppy continuity towards the end of the film, with Harry Gardino as Barabbas. The length of his beard changes kind of from shot to shot. So when Barabbas is freed from prison, like he just basically is like stubble. He's like sort of just like unshaven, but sort of not really bearded. And then like moments later, when Jesus is carrying his cross and Barabbas is watching him, like suddenly Barabbas just has this very big, bushy beard. I don't know. I mean, maybe there were all sorts of miracles going on at the time. The dead rising from the grave, the earthquakes, the veil of the temple being rent in twain. Storms. Maybe Barabbas's beard just sort of spontaneously grew. There are at least two very good action set pieces in King of Kings. One is when I think when Pontius Pilate's legion is approaching Jerusalem for Pilate to take up his governorship of Judea. There's an attack by the Jewish rebels. It's a very well done sequence. And then much later on in the film, during the Holy Week period of time, Barabbas's goons lead I shouldn't really call them goons. I mean, they are justified resistance fighters. But anyway, they wage an attack on the Romans in the city of Jerusalem, and they just get absolutely smashed. I don't know if it's historically accurate, but at one point, the Romans sort of unveil this like kind of super weapon. It's like a gigantic, like harpoon missile type device that fires gigantic arrows through the people fighting, and it's a really good sequence. I don't know if it's historically accurate, but it's yeah. I acquired this copy of the 1961 program for King of Kings, so I don't think I paid very much for it, but anyway. So that's Siobhan McKenna as Mary, the mother of Jesus. I think I sort of mistakenly referred to the actress who played Mary in The Greatest Story Ever Told as Virginia McKenna. I think I was conflating Siobhan McKenna with, Virginia McKenna is an actress, she had nothing to do with The Greatest Story Ever Told. It was actually Dorothy Maguire. So yeah, Dorothy Maguire in Greatest Story Ever Told, Siobhan McKenna in King of Kings, Virginia McKenna in neither of those movies. So I've got some. Yeah, it's got some pretty good pictures. So that's the battle scene, the Romans and the Jewish zealots, and we see some cast members there. So there's Siobhan McKenna, there's Hurd Hatfield as Pontius Pilate, Ron Randall as Lucius, Viveka Linfors as Claudia Pilot's wife. Here we can see a bunch of other actors. There's Harry Gardino as Barabbas, Robert Ryan as John the Baptist, Frank Thring as Herod Antipas, Rip Torn as Judas. Yeah, I think Rip Torn, his voice is kind of weird in this. Like, if you know Rip Torn, he has a very sort of like, gravelly sort of southern accent. He's kind of, I think he was dubbed in this. I think a lot of the actors in this, like a lot of the extras and smaller bit parts were played by, I think, Spanish actors because it was filmed in Spain, and most of them were dubbed. I think Rip Torn was dubbed as well, even though he has a major role. So here we've got the nativity stuff, Pilate and his entourage. The part of Herod Antipas's sort of like nubile, seductive stepdaughter, Salome, she's played by I think it's Bridget Baslin in this. I think she was kind of, I don't think she went on to many significant roles after this, but she's kind of, she has a definite screen presence in this movie. There's the Sermon on the Mount and all sorts of, Last Supper, the trial, the carrying of the cross, etc. There's Jeffrey Hunter. Doesn't really depict the crucifixion here as far as I can see. There's sort of a kind of a heavy-handed visual moment towards the end of the film when Jesus comes back from the dead and he sort of returns to his disciples, and they've got like the fishing net on the beach, and then like Jesus, he casts this shadow, and it's sort of you can sort of see it there, but it's more obvious when the disciples move away, like the Jesus' shadow sort of intercepting the fishing line, and sort of creates a cross, and then the very last shot of the movie is like that image of the cross on the beach. Here we've got the crew. There's Samuel Bronston, Nicholas Ray, Philip Jordan, and the great Miklos Rocha, I think he was Hungarian. He did a lot of really good film scores. I think these are just okay. I don't know if these are supposed to be. Yeah, no, I thought maybe this is like sloppy binding, but I think these are actually, maybe they're supposed to come out. I don't know. Maybe they're like sort of lobby card replicas or something, but especially since we've already seen that picture there and there. So I think these are supposed to be removed. So between 1961 and 1965, we have on one side we have King of Kings and the Greatest Story Ever Told, and on the other side we have the Gospel according to St. Matthew. So Nicholas Ray's King of Kings and George Stevens' Greatest Story Ever Told are both big budget Hollywood adaptations of the life of Christ, with big name stars. They're in color, they're very long movies. They sort of present each of them presents like a synthesis of the four Gospels, with a lot of added dramatic stuff to sort of give the supporting characters sort of more to do, more subplots involving them, whereas Pasolini's film, the Gospel According to St. Matthew, is much different. It's a much more, it's a low budget, black and white movie filmed with pretty much a largely non-professional cast of actors, and it's pretty much a straightforward adaptation of the Gospel of St. Matthew. So it doesn't really have any, it doesn't synthesize all four Gospels. It's just the one Gospel, and it doesn't really invent or expand things to do for the other, so for the supporting characters. It's pretty much a straightforward adaptation of Matthew's Gospel with the dialogue is pretty much all straight from the Gospel, and it's a relatively lean and short movie as well. So it's a very different movie to what Nicholas Ray and George Stevens made.
So yeah, that's it for now, you bastards. Well, I reckon I've said as much as I'm going to say about these LaserDiscs, but maybe I'll get some more sometime.